Hello friends, welcome back to Freedom Forest. Today we're going to be talking about these guys, sweet potatoes, and we're going to be sharing with you how we propagate, store and grow our own sweet potatoes. We are now self-sufficient in them and we have enough for all year round. So if you want to break the cycle of having to buy your own slips, or you're just wondering how to grow them, whether you're growing in a cold climate or a warmer climate, hopefully this video will answer all of your questions. And welcome back to Freedom Forest on this beautiful sunny spring morning. It's the 3rd of April today and we're in zone 9A in the southeast of the UK, temperate climate. Now, a question we get asked a lot is how we propagate our sweet potatoes, and we actually grow these on a scale now that we're self-sufficient all year round in them, and we store our own tubers to propagate for the season. One of the most important things to talk about before we even talk about starting the foliage off on these is storage, because of course the native range of sweet potatoes is from tropical regions, so they're not used to or adapted to the kind of frost we have here, so you can't just leave them in the ground all year round. So we harvest these before the first frosts, and that is very important because even the light frost on these, although they look fine after harvesting, they actually slowly deteriorate and rot over the next couple of months with even the lightest frost. So get your tubers out first of all before your first frosts. The next part of the storage is a process called curing, and that's simply collecting your sweet potatoes together. We put them in a crate like the ones that supermarkets deliver in, and bring them inside in a warmed place, roughly around about 20 degrees. So just inside your living space is absolutely fine, just on the floor somewhere, fairly near a heat source. And we keep them there for a couple of weeks. And what this does is helps to bring out some of the natural sugars in the sweet potatoes, because if you cook them straight away, they're not sweet at all actually. And it also enables you to store them for a much longer period of time. And if you think about it, it's pretty much just like in their native range, harvesting them and just leaving them out in the air really, because that's the kind of temperatures they would have, if not hotter. If you happen to be new to our channel, we also have multiple other videos showing trials I've been doing and our harvest results, both outdoors and polytunnel growing. And I'll put some of the links to those above the video as we go along. Now, another really cool little tip I've learned myself over the last couple of years is actually leaving your seed potatoes in that storage warm area for slightly longer than the ones you're going to be eating, because then what happens is they will start to develop little buds. And once they've begun forming, we then remove the potatoes and put them in an outbuilding that's unheated. And as long as it's not getting moisture dripping on them or frost actually on the surfaces of the potatoes, then they'll be absolutely fine there. Of course, check them periodically like you would normal potatoes for any that are potentially rotting, but they should then store pretty much up until when you need to be starting your slips now in the spring. And a process we like to do is selecting the most healthy and kind of decent sized tubers that we would like to eat for our seed. So we separate those first and cure them with the others that we're going to be eating, but just in a separate pile so we can remember those are our seed. So now, come mid to late February, and we've pretty much eaten all of our tubers stored for eating, we will then find our seed tubers again. We'll then check over each tuber to make sure there's no soft bits or any rot, and then cut these in half. I then fill up one of these propagator trays. In fact, they're identical to the ones that you get with heated propagators. They don't have holes in the bottom. I fill that up with a multi-purpose compost fairly near to the top. And this is roughly about 3 inches deep by, I'd probably imagine, about 15 inches long. I then push our tubers in the way up they would have naturally been facing when harvested. So this one here, this had the foliage attached here coming off. So when I cut this, you can see with some of these ones, I have the tops facing up with the cut side down, and then the cut side that will be from this section here like this, facing upwards. and just so they're orientated the way they would have been in the ground, and I haven't found any problems with the cut side being down, causing them to rot at all. And once I've got each tuber pushed down nicely in the soil, I'll then normally come around and add a bit more and make sure they're really firmed in nicely before giving a good water, but not too much, because of course this tray doesn't have drainage holes. And the reason I'm using one without drainage holes is because I'm bringing this back inside at this stage because we're still having frost. And then what you should then find is within the next few weeks, you'll start to see new shoots emerging from the tubers themselves, or actually from underneath the soil surface. Now here's the same kind of propagator trays here with the lids that you get with them, and these are actually the heated type with the cables coming out here. We've got some tomatoes and chilies going on in these ones. And I find as well, if you put these near a heat source in your house with this lid on, just initially for the first week or so, that will really speed up those buds forming and beginning to shoot. But when the foliage starts emerging, do remove this, because they will tend to kind of like rot and get mould on the leaves because there's not good airflow with these on. Now we'll talk about different varieties and the differences in a minute, but this particular variety here is T65, which over the last 3 or 4 years we've found to be absolutely the best for cold climate growing. And this is probably around about 3 weeks on now since we potted these up. So I've just brought them outside into the tunnel now, and we can start potting these up as slips. Now in terms of our slips, around about 5 to 6 inches of shoot, like this one here, is perfect. Now in terms of potting our slips on, we actually use these kind of quite deep dish root trainer heavy duty trays from a company called Containerwise, and I believe these are the 54 Universal. Now they're absolutely fantastic and absolutely solidly made. The one thing I will say for them is they have very large holes in the bottom, which is great for removing your plants, but what I have found is when you fill these up with your growing medium, unless you wet it first, it will just drop out the bottom like a sieve if you're using quite fine multi-purpose mixed with vermiculite or perlite, for example. So what I like to do is half fill these, really compact it down, fill it to the top, and then I sit it in a tray to soak for half an hour, and also water it from top as well, and then that really kind of conglomerates it all and holds it firm in there for doing my potting up. Okay, so we've got our tray filled up and ready now. Now I'm going to look through here and look for our slips that are for the right kind of size I'm looking for. So this one here is perfect, and I'm simply going to gently pull, and then that will detach from the tuber itself. And you can see there, we've already got a little root forming here. What I then do is strip off some of these lower leaves. You can also use a pair of secateurs if you like. And then I tend to leave about 3 to 4 leaves on that before I pot up. Something I like to do as well is make sure I leave at least a little bit of foliage on each tuber when I'm removing the slips, because you have to think these potatoes now have started to root in here, and the leaves they've got are photosynthesizing now. So if I completely strip off all of the foliage, then it's really going to have to use a lot of energy to keep kind of pumping new shoots up. Whereas if I can leave a little bit on, it's still getting a bit of energy in the meantime while it's growing new slips, and you can continue to harvest slips off this for the next probably 6 weeks. I also like to try something different each year, and normally I wouldn't let a slip get this long before potting up, but as you can see, at the point each leaf comes off, they begin to develop a new shoot in the gaps of these. So what I'm actually going to try and do this year is see whether I can be harvesting our slips the size I want, which is roughly around about here, and then I'm going to leave this section with the foliage on to begin a new slip from this point here, still giving the plant energy from these larger leaves. One of the lovely things about the sweet potato slips is that they are so ready and willing to produce roots, and you can see these white little bumps along the stem, and within a few days actually they will begin sprouting. And they have that air layering trait because they're very similar in growth and habit to something like ivy or bramble if you live in a temperate climate like we do. And these will run along the floor and then they will root readily all around and create big, large green, evergreen carpets in the tropics of their foliage. And something interesting I thought might be worth mentioning is in some of the communities I've stayed with, I was in Borneo the year before last in one of the villages, and they actually have large areas of these, but they don't even eat the tubers. In fact, they hadn't even tasted the tubers. So I went out with them one day to try and find some of the tubers. Because these grow and cover a large area, normally started from just one plant, left to grow in that manner, because these have air layered all around, it's almost impossible to find the tubers because a lot of those areas where they've air layered don't produce tubers. It will just be back where the kind of mother plant was initially. And we were out for probably 20 minutes digging around this massive carpet and didn't find a single tuber. And out there, that's because they actually grow these purely for the foliage as salad leaves. They cut the tips like this and stir fry them, and they're very tasty and very nutritious as well. And if you're watching this from a subtropical or tropical climate, then you could simply just go out, find a plant that's growing everywhere and cut some slips like this and plant those directly in the ground, keeping the ground moist, and maybe wait 7-10 months and come back, and hopefully you'll have a nice haul of tubers. So we've now separated our slips off the plant. They're all of a nice size, roughly around 5 to 7 inches. Removed the lower foliage. Some of them have little roots on, some don't, but that doesn't matter. And it's worth mentioning as well that if it's the first time you've grown sweet potatoes and you have to order your slips this year from a company, quite often this is how they'll arrive. When we've previously ordered slips, we've got them from a company, I believe they're called Highland Horticulture, and they do various varieties. If you order through a lot of mainstream kind of plant catalogues, they will often root the slips and you'll maybe only get 2 or 3, maybe packs of 6 with the soil on rooted, but they're a bit more expensive. So buying them as slips like this in little bundles, they're often just wrapped with a bit of wet tissue and they'll store fine like this for a couple of weeks during the postage period. Now some people advocate removing your slips and putting them in a glass of water on a windowsill, for example. And that is a good way to make them promote root growth, and they will, as I say, very quickly within 3-4 days, maybe a week. But the trouble is after that, I've found they rot very quickly because these aren't bog plants and they don't want to be submerged in water. So I find putting them where they would naturally be in soil initially is much better. Maybe if you ordered these in as slips and you wanted to plant them out within a few days, yeah, do that. But because I'm going to be letting these root and really fill up these root trainers for a good month to 6 weeks yet until we get our last frost, which is usually mid-May. So that gives these a nice bit of time now to really develop some beautiful solid roots in these trainers to give them a bursting start when we plant them out. I'll now come along, use something like a pencil to make a nice hole here for our slip to slip into and poke that down in there and firm the compost around. And I'll keep doing this now over the next month. As and when I've got more slips ready at that kind of 5 to 7 inch size, I'll just keep come and potting them up here. If you've got a bit of root like this on this one here, you can make the hole a little bit bigger, but you don't have to be too precious with these because, as I say, they will root very, very readily. Get that in there. It's nice to come around afterwards as well and just check for air pockets, because sometimes you do get them in these deep dish trays. Like that there, it's just sunk right in. So really pack that down there. If you had a full-size pencil as well, that would help, but it's all I've got here today. So we've now potted up our slips. I'm going to give these a little water now, and the key important thing now moving forward until we plant these out, which will be around mid-May, is keeping them frost-free. Now we'll probably keep them in this little propagation tunnel now until that time, but if we do have a hard frost forecast, then we will bring them in, because any frost on these now is going to severely impact their growth and vigour moving forward. Now we're growing 4 different varieties this year that we've found to grow best in the cold climate we have here. First one here is the T65 that we've just been propagating our slips from, and I found these to not only shoot so much quicker than any other variety in terms of producing these buds, but also they give the biggest yields outdoors for us. Compare that to a common supermarket variety like Burgard here, which we found actually not to do well outdoors, but only when growing indoors in a polytunnel or greenhouse. Now these, apart from this tuber over here, the rest of them are much further behind the T65 in terms of developing their slips. We're also growing Magasaki and Molokai Purple, and they are both at this kind of reduced stage at this time as well. So I would say if you're growing and starting sweet potatoes for the first time and you're in a temperate climate like us that does have a relatively short season and experiences frosts, I would definitely try and get hold of some of the T65. And if you cure and store them correctly, there's no reason why you can't be self-sufficient in your own slips just like we are. They're such a versatile crop. You can not only eat the tubers, but the foliage itself as well. And we also have many other videos showing moving on from this stage now, planting out our slips, which I'll put above here, as well as harvesting videos as well. So if you're not subscribed to our channel, be sure to check those out. Anyway, look forward to seeing you next time, guys. Peace and plants.